Hi, I'm Matt, and I'm one of the pastors here at the Refinery, and I want to personally welcome you to Refinery Online. If you're participating with us during one of our regularly scheduled service times, head over to our live chat, say hello, and let us know where you're joining us from. We've got hosts ready and waiting to greet you. We've got some pretty cool things lined up for this fall. Want to tell us more about that, Kenny?
Absolutely. Well, it's almost starting to feel like fall, kind of, not really, but we're hoping that the weather cools down soon. But listen, I'm really excited to share some cool things that are just getting started here at the Refinery. We are partnering with All Faith Community Services, St. Mary's Food Bank, Lighthouse Fellowship with a West Valley mobile food bank. And it's to help some people put food on the table that are in our area that just really could use an extra boost. So this is a great volunteer opportunity, and we're building a team. So make sure to visit our website for more information and to get signed up. And men, don't forget to let us know if you'll be joining us for our men's dinner and worship night, Friday, October 16th. It's free. We just need you to register to make sure that we have enough food for everyone, because we know we like to eat, right?
Right.
So,
now, speaking of joy on the calendar, we're doing something we've never done here at the Refinery, and I can't wait. October 31st falls on a Saturday this year, so we're taking worship out on the lawn and having a trunk or treat. We'll have worship, eats, treats, but you know what? You're going to need to bring your own seats.
That's right.
Make sure to check out all the details on our website and Facebook.
So, well, listen, we are kicking off a brand new message series today called The Separation of Church and Hate. So this is a timely series for what's happening in our country right now. And Dr. Joe is kicking it off, and I'm looking forward to Dr. Joe today. So stick around after the message for some worship with our worship team and a time of communion. So, Matt, you ready to listen to Dr. Joe?
Here we are.
All right, let's go.
Well, hello, Refinery Anywhere and Refinery Online. We're glad that you've come to share with us today, and I encourage you to dialogue with each other and dialogue with the host as we begin a series in these coming weeks up before the election of the separation of the church and hate. A lot of hate around in our world, but whether it's political or racial, people that have different views even towards Christianity. Maybe you even have someone that you're dealing with in which there's a tough relationship there. And so we want to see, what should a Christian be like in the midst of this? How can we separate ourselves from the hate of the world and bring a different kind of model for us? The topic that we're going to look at today is the idea of civility. Civility is the formal politeness and courtesy in behavior and speech. And I want to begin by telling you a story and going back. We've been having riots recently, and it's pretty upsetting and it's very damaging. I want to take you back a number of years, back to 1992, to some riots in Los Angeles. Rodney King days, can't we just all get along, was his phrase. And it was a difficult time. In fact, someone from my church was leaving work, going to his car, and he got shot. Got shot in the shoulder, and it messed up his arm. And I haven't talked to him in recent years, but I think that he never fully recovered from that, the use of his arm. But I want to even go back a little further than that, back to 1965 in the Watts riots. I remember as a teenager in Chicago watching on the news and listening on the radio about all that was going on between August 11th and August 16th, 1965. Little over 1,000 people were killed. There were some 3,000 arrests. There are 1,000 people that were injured. $40 million worth of damage taking place. 14,000 National Guard come, and between 31 and 35,000 people participated in the riots of that time. The reason I want to go back to that time is because I know a man who was in the midst of that. He was a member of the church I preached at in Downey, California. His name is Joe Arcenega, and his wife, Genevieve, that you can see their picture here. And they were great people from Mexican descent. We loved to go over to their house and eat their food. They had a swimming pool in the back. and we were always the first ones to go in the swimming pool. People in California thought that in April the weather was too cold to go swimming, but we came from Wisconsin. So by April, the weather's getting warm and we're ready to go swimming. The kids just loved it. But I got to know Joe very well. He and I would go calling. Those were back in the days that on Thursday night, we would go visit people. Sometimes announced, had an appointment, sometimes just drop by to talk to them about the Lord or about the church or about their particular needs. And as Joe and I would drive back and forth, we would talk. We would talk theology, we'd talk life, we'd talk about the church. I got to know him very well, just a fine, fine man. But he told me a story of what happened during the Watts riot. Joe was an accountant. He took care of companies' books. He also took care of tax affairs. But he had an office in Watts. And on August 11th, when things started escalating, the police came and they said, "You have to get out of here right now." And they wouldn't let him do anything. He just got his pen, put it in his pocket, went to the door. They let him lock the door, and they said, "You go home." Well, the ensuing days, everything was going crazy, as some of you may remember, or perhaps some of you have read about. And places were burned and vandalized. All kinds of things were happening. And he'd get a phone call here or there from somebody that he knew in the community, but he didn't really know what was going to happen to his office. After about 3 days, they allowed him to go back. And when he got to his office, nothing happened to it. No windows were broken. Nothing was vandalized. The papers, the checkbook on his desk were still exactly like they were. But on the window of his office, it said, "This is a brother." And that sign saved his office. Why did they put that there? Because Joe Arciniega was a person who was civil. He understood civility. He took care of those people, and they knew that he cared for them. He would help them out. He would give some of them money. He would help them in different ways. And he was a person who would listen to their needs. He got to know the people of Watts. The people knew that he was a reputable, caring person. And because of that, even though he was not African American, which was the predominant group of people in Watts at that time, they saw him as a brother, and they spared his office. Civility can go a long way to breaking hate. And that's what we want to see as Christians in our lives. How can we be civil people and separate ourselves from the hate of our society? Well, I thought maybe the best place to look is to the words of Jesus. Maybe that's a good place to go. And the Sermon on the Mount is one of the best as well. And so I want to just take these verses, some of them that many of you have heard over again, but see what Jesus had to say and how we could apply it to this concept of civility. In Matthew, the 5th chapter, in verse 37, Jesus said, "Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no." Let there be integrity in your speech. Earlier in those verses, Jesus is talking about taking oaths. He's not speaking about taking an oath at court. There's nothing wrong with going to court and swearing to God that you're going to tell the truth. But he's talking about in relationship to one another. And in that time, people would take oaths and they'd say, "Well, I swear by the hairs on my head," or "I swear by the temple," or by the altar of the temple where the sacrifice is given. "Oh, I swear by heaven." Today we might say, "Well, honest to God." Well, why do we have to say honest to God if we're people of integrity? People ought to know that what we say is true. Isn't it maddening? Doesn't it even bring almost a hate when you say, "That person lied to me to my face"? And it's just incredulous that they could do that. How could they do that with a straight face? But people do it, and it makes us angry. But when our words have integrity, when our yes is yes and our no is no, it can dispel that area of hate. Another way that people do this also, and this is one that really gets to me, is when someone takes a partial truth and they create a whole nother narrative. Sure, what they said was true, 20% of it was, but they came to a whole different conclusion, a whole different end result by the way they twisted the story around. And when those things happen, it can bring anger and frustration and bitterness and even hate. We are to be people of integrity, not changing the narrative, not lying to people, but our words can be counted upon. And that will help in regard to the civility of getting along with others. Jesus goes on and he says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." I had a professor in college who had a little fun with this, and I have through the years as well. He says, whoever hits you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also, shows you that Jesus was left-handed. Because how do you hit somebody on the right cheek except with your left hand? And so I said, yeah, I like the idea of Jesus being left-handed because I am too. Well, but he's not talking about fisticuffs here. It is not wrong. Some people would take these verses and say it's wrong to defend yourself. That's not what he's speaking about. He's not talking about hitting somebody with a fist. He's talking about a backhand which was an insult of that time. Maybe you remember in our country's history that when someone wanted to duel someone else or they wanted to insult them, they'd take their gloves off and they would slap them in the face and say, okay, let's go outside and let's handle this situation. And that's what Jesus is talking about. When somebody insults you, how do you respond? He says to turn the other cheek, not to give an insult back. Now, some folks scholars have looked at this, and it's kind of an interesting thought for you just to think about. Maybe you want to talk about it online here with the host and others, is that if you turn the other cheek, then somebody has to use their hand with an open hand, which in that culture would be a sign of respect. This is a sign of disrespect. This is a sign of respect, even though they're still hitting you. And so perhaps what Jesus is implying is that you just don't take the insult, but you don't take it backhanded, but you stand up and make them say it to your face and do it in a respectful manner. You can think about that thought. Jesus goes on and he says, and if someone wants to take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. Now the tunic is the inner garment. The cloak is the outer garment. On the one hand, he is saying, go the extra mile, do something extra, like we're going to talk about in just a moment, to do more than what's expected. On the other hand, some would say, this is another indication is that I'm going to stand up and get respect. And that is, if they took your tunic and you gave them your cloak, which is very important, it would keep people warm, they would use it when they would sleep at night, then now the person would be naked. They would have nothing, which of course would be embarrassing, but the point could also be that it would show what kind of person will take away somebody's clothes to leave them naked. And it exposes the person. So on the one hand, it is going the extra mile, doing another step. On the other hand, perhaps it's a stance of saying, no, I am going to expose the wrongness of this person, but I can still do it in a civil way. Jesus goes on and he says, if someone asks you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Back in that culture, if a soldier was walking down a road and he came upon a farmer out in his field, he could require him, according to law, because Rome was controlling Israel at that time, to take his backpack and walk it for 1 mile. In fact, many of the farmers, it was said, they had an exact spot, so they knew exactly how far it was. They'd take it and they'd throw it down and they'd walk back. And Jesus says, no, you go a 2nd mile. You do more than what's expected. Why? Because it will show the kind of person you are, the kind of integrity you have. It will show that even though you do not like being oppressed by this outside force, yet you're not going to take that against them. You're not going to show hate. You're going to show compassion, love, and sacrifice. Jesus goes on, and he says, give to everyone who asks you, and do not turn away those who would borrow from you. To give to the needy is a way that we can separate ourselves from hate. Now, I know we need to be careful and we need to be judicious and judge the situation to see how somebody's going to use what we give to them. But it's an indication of the generosity, that when there is generosity in someone's life, it can reduce the hate on the other side. Now, I want to just throw in here, I know that not always do these civil acts get a good response. Sometimes people do not respond positively. But I think Paul had something to say here. He says, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with all people. As far as it depends upon you, be civil with all people. And he says to go the extra mile to give the people in need. And then Jesus says this, and this is a tough one. It's a tough one for me. He says, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Wow. I can remember when I was a kid, before I started going to church, I went to Vacation Bible School. And the teacher had us do a craft. She took some green construction paper, had us cut out 2 circles, and then gave us a tongue depressor and glued those circles together so you made a little fan. And on each side of the fan, she had us write, love your enemies. And I can remember, as I was writing that down, I thought, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. You don't love your enemies, you punch them in the nose. You don't love your enemies, you bomb them. That's what you do. I had no understanding until many years later of what Jesus was saying. That when you love your enemies, it reduces the hate that they want to show back to you. Abraham Lincoln had a good saying. He said, the best way to destroy an enemy is to make him your friend. And the other part of this that's very important, and it's tough, is to pray for our enemies. You cannot pray sincerely for somebody that you're having great difficulty with. You can't pray for an enemy very long and continue to hold hate and hold a grudge. We have been called to a whole different standard, a separation of the church and hate. But finally, what Jesus says in the 7th chapter in the 12th verse, he says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What a great principle. Rabbis of the time usually said, don't do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. Jesus changes that because, one, you can just be passive. This one, you have to be active. You have to do unto others what you want done to you. And when that is done, then that, again, breaks down the barriers between people. Wouldn't it be a great world, whether people are Christian or not, if they would just follow this principle, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So Jesus gives us some great instruction on civility. But it might appear, unless you take the alternative views that I shared about turning the cheek and the cloak, which may be a little extreme, but if you don't take those, you would say this is pretty passive. It seems like to be civil, you just got to be nice and be kind and kind of let things go and, just kind of become a doormat type of thing. I'd like to tell you a story about Paul in which he acts out in a civil way, but not in a passive way of a situation that happens to him. He's in Philippi and they're preaching and teaching, he and Silas, and there's this girl that keeps following after them who was filled with some kind of spirit that gave her the opportunity to tell the future. And her owners got a lot of money because she was able to do this. And she's following Paul, and she said, listen to these men. They are giving you instruction of how to be saved from the Most High God. And after several days of this, Paul gets a little irritated, and he turns to the girl, and he speaks to the spirit. He says, come out of her. And when the spirit comes out, she can no longer tell the future. Well, the owners of this girl are pretty upset. And so they grab Paul and Silas, they take them to the authorities, and they make up a story. It's not the story of just what he did. It's that they're teaching all kinds of things that are contrary. They're causing all kinds of ruckus and riot within our society. Something needs to be done, and people start getting on it. This mob mentality. Yeah, get these guys out of here. And then they beat them, and they flog them, and they throw them in prison. That night, about midnight, Paul and Silas, rather than being overly upset, they're praying and they're singing. And at midnight, as they're singing, there's an earthquake and the doors open up. And the guard is afraid that the prisoner is going to get loose. And if they do, it's his head. He's going to die, because that was part of the culture, that if you let a prisoner free, you were going to be killed. And so he's about to kill himself rather than to be killed by his superiors. And Paul yells out, don't do that. Everybody's safe. No one's leaving. And then they shared with him the gospel of what they had been singing about. And the man, this Philippian jailer, is converted, and his life has changed, and his family has changed, and he cleans up the wounds that Paul has. And then in the morning, the authorities decide to let Paul and Silas go. And here we read in verses 35 through 40 these words. When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, "Release those men." The jailer told Paul, "The magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can leave, go in peace." But Paul said to the officers, "They beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now they want to get rid of us quietly? No. Let them come themselves and escort us out." The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed. They came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. And after Paul and Silas came out of prison, they went to Lydia's house, they encouraged the people there, and then they left. You see, here Paul had been falsely accused, he had been falsely beaten, he had been falsely put in jail. He doesn't start a riot, but he does stand up for his rights. And he said, "I'm a Roman citizen. I shouldn't be treated like this. And I want to talk to the magistrates, those in charge." And they did that. And civilly, then they let them go and escorted them out. And so civility doesn't mean passivity. You don't have to be passive. It's a matter of standing up for our rights, but not causing a riot, not being destructive, of separating ourselves from hate, but showing compassion, love, but also strength. Joe Arciniega was such a person. In a culture that was known for violence, he showed civility. His faith was lived out as he lived his occupation of being an accountant. And because of that, he was seen as a brother. I close with these words that I saw on a friend's Facebook page. It says, "Also highly contagious is kindness, patience, love, enthusiasm, and a positive attitude. Don't wait to catch it from others. Be the carrier." Let us be civil people in the time of hate. Let us show the love of Christ, even though while we stand up for who we are, who we believe in, so that people will come to know the saving grace of Jesus.
Welcome to the Refinery Online Experience. We're so glad you guys have joined us today. Drop a line in the chat, let us know you're here. Why don't you worship with us today? Come on. Our praise awaits. Our praise awakes you with the dawn. Our souls awake to you and lift a song. We've seen the things that you have done, and still we know the best is yet to come. Oh, there's more to come. Open the gates, God. Open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Hey! We pour out our praise, God. Your presence here is all we need. You break our chains with sounds of victory. You're changing everything. Open the gates. Open the gates to let your glory come down. Open our hearts to let our worship pour out. Yeah. Open flood this space. No one else could take your place. Come have your way. Nothing else could take your place. Come on. Come flood this space. No one else could take your place. Come have your way. No one else could take your place. Say, open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Open the gates, Lord. Open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Yes, God. Open the gates. Oh, 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 oh. Open our hearts. Yes. Amen.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only.
So as we come near the end of today's service, I want to encourage you to gather any of the elements that you've set aside for communion today. You know, one of the things I love about Refinery Christian Church is that we take communion each and every week. And I love this because communion is a great opportunity to take spiritual inventory of our lives. It helps us reflect on the week that's passed and look ahead to the week that's coming with fresh eyes. We remember that every sin was washed away and carried on the cross. We remember that every punishment that should have been ours was paid for by Jesus with his body broken on our behalf. And you know, I think about at the first communion moment, the disciples truly didn't know these things like we do. They didn't realize the things that were going to happen, but of course Jesus did. Listen to the words of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verses 19 through 20. It says this. It says, "And he took the bread, and he gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, 'This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' And in the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you.' So when you're ready, take the bread. And when you're ready, drink the cup and realize that Jesus did for you and I what we can never do. Jesus offers freedom that we can never gain and peace of mind that we can never find. So please take communion when you're ready.
Thanks for joining us today. We want to make sure you know that we are here for you, and we want to help you take some next steps to help you grow in your faith. Whenever you're ready to be baptized, or you want to become a kingdom changer by volunteering with us, let us know. Maybe you're ready to meet some new people by joining a life group, or a Refinery Anywhere site, or going to the men's event. Visit our website or Facebook page and connect with us. And don't forget, wherever you go and whatever you do, don't forget to tell someone about Jesus.